Passing Clouds. Chapter 3. The Obsession. Scott Daniels paced back and forth in his living room, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. The modern, minimalist decor of his home, once a source of pride, now felt sterile and empty, offering no comfort. Every perfectly placed piece of furniture only amplified the disarray in his mind. His thoughts kept circling back to one person: Masai Hammond. She had taken up residence in his mind, a constant presence that he couldn't shake, like an itch beneath the surface that he was desperate to scratch. On the other end of the line was Rick, an old college buddy turned detective, a man who had always been able to pull strings and find answers. Rick had bailed Scott out of a few sticky situations in the past, but tonight's request was different. This wasn't about getting out of trouble. This was about solving a mystery that had wormed its way into Scott's mind and refused to leave. "I'm telling you, Rick, there's something off about this woman," Scott said, his voice low and insistent. "She's got this whole aura, like she's playing some kind of game with everyone. I saw her getting into a Bentley Continental, man, a chauffeur-driven Bentley. You don't just casually ride in one of those unless you've got serious money or you're connected to someone who does. I'm betting she's some kind of high-end escort or something close. There's no way a regular lawyer could afford that kind of luxury on her own." Rick's voice crackled through the phone, steady and professional, the voice of reason. "Scott, are you sure about this? You said she was delivering food the other night. Doesn't exactly scream high-end anything to me." "Exactly," Scott nearly shouted, halting his pacing abruptly. "That's what doesn't make sense. Why would a woman who rides in a Bentley be delivering food herself? It's like she's living a double life or something." I checked my dash cam, and I've got the car's license plate. I even took a video of her when she delivered the food to me. She's definitely hiding something, and I need to know what. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of Rick typing. The silence dragged on, heightening Scott's impatience. "Okay," Rick finally said. "I've got something. The car's registered to a law firm, actually, and the address—" "Hold on." There was another pause, and then Rick continued, his tone tinged with curiosity. "You're not going to believe this, Scott, but the car is actually registered to a Masai Hammond. She's legit, Scott. A lawyer, and from the looks of it, a pretty successful one. I'm sending you her address now." Scott's phone buzzed as the text came through. He opened the message quickly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the details. Masai Hammond, the address, and a picture of her stepping out of the Bentley. "You're kidding," he muttered, more to himself than to Rick. "This doesn't add up." "Look, Scott," Rick said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I don't know what's going on in your head, but maybe it's time to let this one go. I mean, she's too young to own a house in that part of town, drive a Bentley, and yet somehow still be cooking and delivering food herself. Maybe her mother owns all that, and she's just living with her. But whatever it is, she's not what you think. And if she is, well, you've got the information now. Just be careful, all right?" But Scott wasn't listening. His mind was already racing ahead, fixated on the address Rick had sent him. "Thanks, Rick. I owe you one." He ended the call without waiting for a response, his fingers tightening around the phone as he stared at the address. It was just a couple of miles from his parents' house, nestled in a wealthy neighborhood he knew well. Without wasting another moment, Scott grabbed his keys and headed out the door, his determination hardening into something more intense, more dangerous. The drive was short, but Scott's mind raced the entire way. Who was this woman, really? And why did she seem so intent on brushing him off, on making him feel insignificant? His masculinity, his sense of self-worth, felt under siege, and he wasn't about to let that stand. He needed to confront her, to get answers, to regain control. He arrived at the address and parked a short distance away, his red Ferrari gleaming under the streetlights like a predator lying in wait. The neighborhood was quiet, upscale with immaculate lawns and gated properties. Scott turned off the engine and settled in to wait, his eyes locked on the house that matched the address Rick had given him. Minutes turned into hours, the night growing darker and more silent. Scott's frustration grew with each passing moment. Just when he thought he might have missed her, he saw a figure approaching from the street. It was Masai, riding her bike up to the gate. He watched as she dismounted, her movements graceful and unhurried, seemingly unaware of the turmoil she had stirred within him. Masai parked her bike and walked toward the gate, her hand reaching out to close it behind her. That's when she noticed the red Ferrari parked just outside her home. She paused, her eyes meeting Scott's through the windshield. For a moment, neither of them moved, the tension between them thick and suffocating. Scott expected some kind of reaction from her, surprise, fear, maybe even anger. But Masai's face remained calm, unreadable, as though he were just another passerby. She looked at him for a long moment, then continued to close the gate, as if he were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Scott felt his anger surge. How could she be so indifferent? How could she treat him, Scott Daniels, like he was just another guy? He slammed his fists against the steering wheel in frustration, the impact doing little to soothe the sting of her nonchalance. Masai locked the gate and turned her back on him, walking up to her front door without another glance in his direction. The sound of the gate clicking shut felt like the final word in a conversation that had left him reeling. As she disappeared into her house, Scott sat in his car, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of anger, confusion, and bruised pride. He had come here to confront her, to force her to acknowledge him, to prove to himself that he was still in control. But instead, she had ignored him, dismissed him with nothing more than a look. Scott gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white with the effort. Who was this woman? And why did she have such power over him? She had taken something from him, something he couldn't quite name, and he was determined to get it back. But as he sat there, staring at the now-closed gate, a sinking feeling settled in his gut. The more he tried to assert his dominance over her, the more she seemed to slip through his fingers. Masai Hammond was unlike any woman he had ever encountered, and for the first time in his life, Scott Daniels was beginning to realize that not everything and everyone could be controlled. As the night deepened, Scott finally started his car and drove away, the roar of the engine echoing in the empty streets. But as much as he tried to leave her behind, he knew that Masai wasn't done with him yet. And worse, he wasn't done with her either.